The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our peer sharing how jurisdictions are implementing the SB 1383 procurement requirements webinar. We have some of our panelists on the screen. I just want to double check that my slides are showing at the moment. If someone, thank you. So we have with us today a variety of presentations. Just going to move forward here. There we go. So the agenda for today is we're going to have a compost and mulch segment brought up with Peter Schultz-Allen, Michelle Young, Kelly Schoonmaker. At the end of the compost and mulch presentations, we'll have a Q&A session that you can ask your questions on compost and mulch to the presenters. After that, each of those segments will be about 10 to 15 minutes each. After that, we'll have Will Chen with Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts talk about anaerobic digestion. We'll have a Q&A session for him after that. And then followed with the kind of a peer sharing session where we just have Zinzi Tan, Kathleen Gallagher, and Michelle White discussing what they are doing in their jurisdictions to implement the 1383 procurement requirements and accomplish their target. The focus of this presentation is more peer sharing. The questions and answers should be geared towards the presenters and their presentations. Any questions for CalRecycle staff or regarding the procurement requirements, we will definitely note and we'll follow up with you after the webinar. I won't be answering those during the webinar. Having said that, we're gonna start things off with Peter. So Peter, I'll make you presenter and we'll get going. Come on. Sorry, having trouble clicking. There we go. Okay, Peter, you should be good to go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so hopefully you can see the screen now.
You are good to go.
All right. Well, thanks, Andrew and CalRecycle for inviting me to speak today. I work for EOA Incorporated, and EOA is the program manager for the Santa Clara Valley Urban Runoff Pollution Prevention Program. It's a mouthful. It's SCVRP is our acronym. And so on behalf of SCVRP, I'd like to present some information to you today on municipal use of compost and mulch in relation to SB 1383. So we'll get started. And here's just I'm going to talk about two things basically. What is regenerative landscaping and the principles of that program and the relationship to SB 1383, and also municipal mulch and compost use examples from my experience. So regenerative landscaping. Rescape California, you may be aware of them. They used to be called the Bay Friendly Landscaping Coalition. And so 15 years ago, it was formed. It's a nonprofit, and they have developed and refined a holistic approach to landscape design, construction, and maintenance using the 8 principles that are shown in the graphic here. These principles include carbon sequestration and the use of compost and mulch, and using climate appropriate vegetation, and not using turf grass typically unless it's for recreation or some use like that, but not just for aesthetic purposes. And the beauty of the Rescape principles are that they are adaptable to whatever bioregion you're in. And so I think they pair well with SB 1383 and the focus on using compost and mulch. And so that's why I'm mentioning it today. So what are some of the regenerative landscaping principles that correlate to SB 1383? Well, soil conservation and restoration, I think, is a big one. And that's kind of what I think the reason for using compost and mulch is really to restore our urban soils and conserve those soils as well. There's fire prevention and restoration aspects of regenerative landscaping, avoiding pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. And then the last two on the list here, urban forestry and using compost and wood mulch, are what I'm going to focus on today. All right, so I have 3 examples of how to use compost and mulch in the municipal setting and to help meet the procurement requirements of SB 1383. So the first one is about changing and moving away from the use of nitrified soil conditioner or NSC. Some of you may be familiar with this soil amendment, some may not be, but it still appears in some municipal codes. When I worked for the city of Emeryville, it was in our municipal code. And so that's not a regenerative landscaping practice to use that product, because basically it's a forest product, typically like sawdust, and then they add a synthetic nitrogen to it. So it can kill flora and fauna in the soil. It's a chemical fertilizer. It's not a natural fertilizer. So it's not a great practice. And using compost and mulch is a much better way to go. So what you would do then is change, if you haven't done it already, go look at your municipal code, make sure it doesn't require, like it did in Emeryville's case, the use of this product. And if it does require something, you can change that to using compost. For city standards is the phrase that I like to use, because it gives you a lot of flexibility on what type of compost you can require. In our case, in Emeryville, when I was there, we were trying to bring back into the city organic materials that were derived from organic materials that were taken out of the city. So I thought that was a way to complete the loop there on the nutrient cycle. And of course, it will comply with WELO. And so a lot of you may have already done this in relationship to that program, the Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance. So here's another example related to trees. And so you may have been walking around your city and seen how sidewalks are being pushed up by tree roots or other problems with tree roots or trees harming infrastructure or assets in your jurisdiction. Usually, one of the biggest issues or reasons for that is that trees don't have enough room to grow. Their roots just are not able to go through compacted soil, which is typically what you have under sidewalks or under pavement. And for a tree to get large and to be healthy, it needs more uncompacted soil than is typically provided. And so in Emeryville, we adopted a requirement that for new tree planting, we had to provide either 600, 900, or 1,200 cubic feet of soil volume per tree. And that depends on whether the tree is going to be small, medium, or large at maturity. So it kind of depends on the tree species. But you can use compost and mulch in that soil as well and on the surface to help meet your SB 1383 requirements. And then you'll also have the advantage of having trees that are bigger and healthier. So my third example is related to construction. And some of you may work as inspectors for stormwater pollution prevention plan inspections, or maybe you work for a construction company. When I was in Emeryville, I found that people used fiber rolls a lot. They're also called straw wattles. And they can be effective on a slope in some situations where they can be trenched in. But in Emeryville, we didn't have a lot of slopes. It's a flat city. And we had more situations like this shown in the picture here, where you have an inlet and you have asphalt, or maybe it's some other situation where you have an inlet and it's on flat ground, and maybe it's gravel or something like that. And these compost socks, like the one shown here, are much more effective than a straw wattle. And so we changed our specifications in Emeryville to say that you had to use this kind of compost-based BMP. We didn't specify a particular product. We just said it had to be a compost-based BMP for this particular type of use. And I really recommend watching this video. It's a short video, about 2 minutes long, where it compares the effectiveness of straw wattles and compost socks for these type of situations. And I think it does a really great job at showing how the difference between the two. So maybe later today you can click on this, and I think they're putting it in the chat. You can click on the link there, and it'll also be in the PDF of my presentation later.
5 minutes, Peter.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just got a few slides left, so I think I'm doing well on the time here. this is an example of how compost and mulch can also be used in your jurisdiction, which is with green stormwater infrastructure. This particular stormwater landscape here, where the water flows from the street into this bioretention area, uses a type of no-mow turf with native grasses, but sometimes you have mulch on the surface in between bunch grasses or other plants. And the soil that's in here, it's called our biotreatment soil media. It's required that you use this in the Bay Area and in the I should say in the communities that are under our municipal regional permit. You're required to use this biotreatment soil media in these types of stormwater landscapes, and 30 to 40% of that soil media is made of compost. So that's a lot of compost that can be every time you're building some green infrastructure. That's another great way to comply with SB 1383. So in terms of mulch, there's also a great way to use mulch and compost is when you're renovating a bioretention area. And this is an example from the county of San Mateo in a parking lot where some of the plants had died and they wanted to refresh it and renovate it. So they pulled out the weeds, they pulled out some of the dead plants, they checked the irrigation system to make sure that it was working well, and then replaced everything back in with new plants. Here's the finished renovation, and you can see the mulch on the surface, and below that 3 inches of mulch is compost as well. So just briefly, we're now recommending with the municipalities that we work with that they use composted wood mulch, and we have a new specification for that, which is at the bottom of the screen here, the link to that. So composted mulch is even better. Composted wood mulch is even better than just regular wood mulch. Wood mulch is great, but when you compost it and you put it through that industrial kind of composting process, so I'm not talking about just putting it in a pile or in your backyard or whatever. It's got to heat up and go through the process to further reduce pathogens, the PFRP, and then it inoculates that mulch and soil media with beneficial organisms. It holds more water when it goes through the composting process, and it floats less. And that's partly because it gets heavier, but also because some of the oils and resins in the wood are broken down by fungi in the composting process. There's also evidence that it's less flammable. There's another benefit. And you're often killing pathogens or reducing pathogens that might be in the mulch, like sudden oak death, which we are, of course, very concerned with. And you get more credit under SB 1383. When you use composted wood mulch, it counts as compost, which you get more credit for compost than you do for regular wood mulch that's not composted. So, and just here quickly are a couple of pictures. Here's what uncomposted wood mulch. It's just one example of kind of shredded tree trimmings, and then after you compost it. So you can see the difference there. But we like having that different size particles, big pieces, little pieces, and some fines in there as well, so that it's got all the benefits of the different types of aspects of compost, and those pieces kind of knit together and help it not float away. And that's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. So we see the questions coming in. Just as a reminder, we're going to do the 3 compost and mulch presentations first, and then we'll answer those questions as a group at the end of the compost and mulch segment. So now we're going to move to Michelle Young, and I am going to share your slides for you. Okay, are your slides up, Michelle? Can you see them? Okay, go ahead, Michelle. Oh, can't quite hear you. Did I not mute you? It says you, there we go.
Thank
Good.
you.
Sorry.
You can try to mute me, but awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. and share what we've been learning at the County of Santa Clara and with our cities throughout the county. My name is Michelle Young, and I'm a senior management analyst with the county, and worked for 24 years with the city of San Jose, which is our biggest city. So I've had the opportunity to move up into the county level and learn more about the other cities as well. So go ahead and let's move to the next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about both how we're looking at the procurement requirements as an unincorporated county and how we're integrating the activities of the 15 cities in the county and where we're not. I want to give you some distinctions about Santa Clara County because I think they're applicable to the case studies that I'm going to talk about. So the County of Santa Clara has a little over 2 million residents. Half of them are in the city of San Jose, so it's a very big portion of the county. There are 15 cities altogether, and we are not a JPA. We collaborate under a memorandum of agreement, and so we do coordinate, and we have a joint fund that comes from landfill fees that we can use for projects. But in general, the cities need to either act independently or decide that the county or some other entity will take action on their behalf, which we are doing especially with edible food. But procurement is another place that we're looking for ways to coordinate. In the unincorporated side, we have only 89,000 residents, so a fairly reasonable or small unincorporated area. But the county as an organization has 20,000 staff. So in terms of things like procurement, there's a lot of people to work with. And the 5 data systems. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. But we are also kind of distinct in the fact that we have over 24,000 acres of working farmland in the county. So we do have a high demand and a very mature compost market. So the large composters in our area actually do sell all their product, and a high percentage of it, not quite 50%, but somewhere in the 30% goes to agriculture. So we have a very mature compost market. Go ahead, let's move on. So one of the things that I've been talking with CalRecycle about, and they wanted me to mention today, is how we're trying to organize the procurement requirements in a decentralized procurement environment with the city. So we've got those 20,000 employees on about 20 different campuses, including hospitals and things like that. So how are we going to manage this? So in 2020, we established an internal working group, and for many of the people in the group, it was the first time that they had worked with these other units towards an end objective. We may have worked on a memo or something together, but we monthly we meet with the procurement department, the Office of Sustainability, my department, which is Consumer and Environmental Protection. And our unit includes a lot of other activities. We have solid waste and recycling and agriculture, who are 2 big players in this conversation. We also have facilities and fleet at the table because they have the Parks and Recreation Department and our Sustainable Landscaping Unit. So they are bringing a lot of the on the ground, what's happening, who's moving material, who's contracting, et cetera. And then our planning department, I'll talk a little bit about a very big project that we'll be using for composted mulch procurement. And very critically, the Office of the Attorney. So we've been very involved with them, not only in the ordinances, but they're looking at all of our contracts and things which we'll be discussing. So go ahead and move on to the next slide. Thank you. So this team that's meeting, we have some short-term objectives that we've been working on over the last couple of years. And we've had some big successes, so we're pretty excited. Still a lot of questions. But one of our first goals was to get a new sustainable procurement policy. So you will have a link to that in the chat, and you can check that out. The policy is not specific to 1383. So where the specifics will be, the policy refers to the guidelines that the county agencies and officials will utilize. So in the guidelines, we are focusing on what the process will be for the procurement of paper, compost, mulch, et cetera. And when we do have more mature markets on energy and fuel, we will look at that as well. But for right now, on the recovered organics, we're primarily focusing on compost and mulch. But again, it's a decentralized system. So we have 5 different databases, multiple departments. And so it's been a really interesting process to try and bring those communications together. And the punchline is we are keeping the 5 databases, and we've talked to CalRecycle about the fact that that's what we will show them in an audit, is that some of the purchases are here, some of them are here, but we are tracking all of them, but they're in different systems. So at this point, we are not generating a new system to cover everything. What we are doing, though, is we're establishing outreach and communication for county staff, especially on the paper side, because there's way more purchases on paper, obviously. So people have P cards all the way to big contracts that we have with Staples. And so there's a lot of procedure in order to make sure that we're capturing all that. But the same is true for compost and mulch products at this point. So we're trying to make sure that these guidelines tell staff what documents they need to maintain and what needs to be in their contracts. So this is where the attorneys have come in so importantly, is they have helped us to look at all of our procurement contracts, and they have created, you will also get this as an attached document if you like, our enforceable mechanism for mulch. They spent a lot of time looking at the requirements, and so we have a standard exhibit that will be put into our contract. So you can see that exhibit, and that is what we submitted to the state as our enforceable mechanism, because the attorneys, that's the way they're looking at it. The way we would enforce it is through a contract for purchase. So you can take a look at that mechanism that we're using. And so far, I think we've adjusted 4 different agreements for compost and mulch, and now they're starting to look at the capital projects, which are a really big onion to peel. Let's go ahead and move on.
About 4 minutes, Michelle.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so while we are working on all the procedures for all these different procurement activities that will happen through Brightview, for example, which is our biggest contract for compost and mulch, this is the area where we think we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck. We have a program called the Ag Resiliency Incentive Program. You'll also get a link to this. You can go check it out, look at all the documents, look at the application. This is an application for farmers and ranchers in the area for up to $30,000 per application. And we started it in a pilot, and we got 64 applications for a total of $1.3 million. About 80% of those applications have compost and mulch in them. The pilot amount was $200,000. So we currently have 12 grant contracts that are being established by our attorneys to implement the program. So go ahead and move on to the next one. So this was a program that was already established before 1383 requirements. I mean, we knew it was coming, but this program was established to meet the agricultural plan and the climate action plan, Coyote Valley and countywide climate action plans. So the drivers were on the ag sector, but now we are expanding our budget proposal. So we have a budget proposal in that we'll know about in the next couple of weeks. And we actually have a board meeting today to talk about the program some more. And we've put in a request for this to be an ongoing budget item from the general fund for $305,000 a year for material and management. The other thing that we're doing is we're using some of our local assistant grant to try and develop an interface for other cities throughout the county to also be able to use some of their allocation to support these grants so that we can grant more of them in Santa Clara County. So go ahead and move on to the next slide. So again, to summarize, in the amount of time that we had today, these are some of the things that we're working on and continuing to learn, and excited to hear what other people are learning as well. One of our biggest challenges is where this will live. There's a little bit of hot potato going on, both based on staff availability and funding. So we have a couple budget proposals in to try and get some staff to oversee these activities between the departments that I mentioned. And again, confirming the recording practices among all these buyers is an ongoing challenge. And identifying the funding. So I mentioned that our ARI, the Ag Resiliency Incentive Program, is coming from the general fund. And that's because there has been concern about using garbage fees for a countywide requirement. So we are actually going to use general fund for those purchases, as opposed to shifting that to garbage ratepayers. So that's the model that we're using at this point. But every time you have staffing or procurement decisions, we're going to have to ask where that funding should come from, and those will be ongoing conversations. Our ongoing material needs for county operations are fairly minimal, which again pushes this opportunity for the ag lands into a higher relief. And so this is why we're very excited about that opportunity. And then another note is that as we try to look at capital projects that are being developed in the county, again, it's just not the way they do business to try and drill down into where in these huge capital projects do we make the recommendations. So the attorneys are working on capital projects right now to try and understand how we can put those requirements into a capital project that might have, 4 different levels of consulting services. So those are some of my high points. Look forward to the Q&A, and please let me know if you have questions when you see the links and documents that we've provided. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. We're going to now move on to Kelly with Stop Waste. Making you presenter.
Okay. Hi, just saying hi, and I'll go ahead and turn my webcam off. Let's see. You should see my slides.
We see your slides.
Excellent. Okay. Okay. Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be part of this panel with 2 colleagues who I know well and very much admire. So thank you for having me. Stop Waste is a joint powers authority, and we work on behalf of 17 member agencies that you can see here. We in the county have had food waste collection for at the curb for about 20 years, and it's been required since 2012. And the cities in the county, in addition, have had requirements in place to use composted mulch in new landscape construction, as well as the maintenance of existing landscapes. Peter talked about this. The city of Emeryville is a great example, and that's been since the mid-2000s. But even with that, to meet the procurement targets, our cities are going to have to use multiple strategies to try to do that. And of course, we're focusing on compost and mulch. Mainly, we do not have access to RNG or electricity from biomass. The amount is negligible from our CCA. So the first thing that we did was try to figure out, I'm going to walk through an example of the city of Fremont. The first thing we did was try to figure out, okay, get a sense of this picture. So we figured out how much what the target would be, of course, like you have all done for city of Fremont, and then converted that to cubic yards of compost and cubic yards of mulch using a bulk density of 600 pounds per cubic yard, because that's, of course, how you're going to buy it and how you're going to use it in the city. And then we tried to see how much compost and mulch a city could actually use on the landscape areas that it maintained. So we worked with the landscape architecture firm and our member agencies to pull together this map that was using existing GIS data and other data sources, as well as doing some manual entry. And you can see there's these little green specks. So if we zoom in on one, it looks like this. From that point, you can see some areas take compost every year, some areas take mulch. And at that point, we were able to assign some application rates to figure out how much we could use. So for this field here, we can see it's about 180,000 square feet. It uses this much compost, and that works out to about this much organics procured. So from there, we can go ahead and roll it up. So we can see that citywide, the city of Fremont has room for 3,200 cubic yards of compost and about 46,000 cubic yards of mulch, and then convert that back into tons of organics right here, so that then we can see how that stacks up against the procurement target. You can see City of Fremont still needs to find a place for 2,800 tons. So we want to find some ways to do that, some other strategies. So the other question we asked was, well, how much is this going to cost? So we used some rough costs based on our experience. We order compost for our own carbon farming project and other things, and work with landscape contractors enough to know the rates. And so from that, we developed this kind of rough idea of how much this is going to cost. Again, this is City of Fremont. And you can see that the bulk of the costs of applying compost and mulch in a city are going to be in the application. So as we're trying to figure out how cities can use their finite budgets to meet the target, we see removing this application cost as one of the ways to do that. So the first, I'm going to give a few examples of how we're doing that. The first one is by expanding the distribution of free compost. So that means all you have to do is get it to the spot, and then people pick it up, and then they spread it on their own. So we're doing this through creating compost hubs, which are sort of a decentralized network of distribution points. We're working with our urban farms in the county because we know they need compost. We know the communities they serve need compost, and there are barriers for them to getting it. So it's a win for them. And of course, it's a win for the city because it's a very passive way to distribute compost. So how it works is the urban farm can get as much compost as they want whenever they need it, and as long as they let people come and take it for free. So you can see they can either take one of these burlap bags or bring their own bucket. This pile has been in place. It's been open for a couple months, and we haven't been promoting it. So far, it's moved about 50 yards of compost and reached at least 60 people, and then about 40%, actually, maybe not 60 people. We've had 60 people fill out the survey. 40% of those people are returning. So that's exciting. And again, it's not a lot, but it's no work for city staff. And it removes the spreading cost. Another way we're looking at removing spreading costs is by expanding carbon farming on ranches and farms, and we're doing that by working with a couple organizations. One is our county resource conservation district. We worked with them on this project you see here, which is our carbon farming project on our own agency's property in the Altamont Hills. And what we're trying to do with them is reach their network of farmers and ranchers who are already getting grants and technical assistance from them. And so we're just starting those conversations now. The other organization we do work with is Zero Foodprint. Zero Foodprint is a nonprofit organization, and they make grants to ranchers and farmers to implement carbon farming practices, including compost application. So our pilot project is to supplement their existing funding stream to reach their grantees and get more compost on the ground. And what's nice about this is Zero Foodprint, well, in addition to removing these spreading costs that I've been talking about, Zero Foodprint is the direct service provider. Our agreement is with them. So while we are tracking where all the compost goes, they have to track it for their grantees anyway. We only have to have the one agreement. We don't have to have a grant or an agreement with each of the users, and we don't have to review their applications or anything. So that's underway now. I should know more about how that goes in the next few months. One other thing I want to say about that is we did submit this model, the executed agreement to CalRecycle, and they gave it the thumbs up. So that's good. And then we're also looking at some ways to remove all the costs. And this has not been approved by CalRecycle, but the idea here is the Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, WELO, requires the use of compost and mulch. And so what we would like to be able to do is have cities take credit for all of the compost and mulch that is used by all of the projects, including the private projects. And to do that, what we have to do is make that project team the direct service provider. And after that point, there's already an existing framework to incorporate 1383 language. You can meet the the requirement for a prospective agreement by putting the language that you're using compost on behalf of the jurisdiction in the permitting application. And then on the back end, as part of the WELO verification and enforcement process, the certificate of completion is already requiring receipts for compost. So asking for mulch in addition is not entirely a new ask, even though it's a little more work. Now, this is not great for every city. We have cities that are totally built out. It's probably not worth it for them because of the amount of compost and mulch they would get. But if you're a city with new development, like City of Hayward, could meet its target, it could meet 7 to 21% of its target, anywhere just from counting all the WELO projects, because there's that much development going on. And again, it's not making it the entire way, but it's getting credit for something you're already supposed to be doing anyway. And then, thank you. And then the other thing we're looking at is lawn conversion rebates. Increasingly, water agencies and other agencies that issue lawn rebates, like cities, are requiring or incentivizing sheet mulching for lawn conversion, which is, and sheet mulching, what you do is you leave the lawn in place, and on top of that, you put a layer of cardboard, an inch of compost, and 3 inches of mulch. And so this is another thing where we've got a rebate process already. And so the 1383 requirements can kind of be incorporated into that existing process. So in the rebate application, the applicant can say that they're using the compost and mulch on behalf of the city. And then to get the rebate, of course, they have to submit receipts anyway. So that documentation is already coming in. Of course, it's a little extra work of reporting and record keeping, making sure that gets into the annual report. But if you happen to be a jurisdiction that is administering your own rebates, for example, we're working with City of Pleasanton on this one because they do a supplemental rebate, and CalRecycle is actually reviewing that language right now. So please cross your fingers that they say it's okay so that we can do this. Then this might be another way to get a credit for additional compost that you're not procuring directly, but it's because of the city's efforts of enforcement and their diligence in doing that, that you are making sure that this compost and mulch gets used. And then the next step will be connecting our cities with the water agencies, because of course that's going to be yet another agreement that we have to have, and it'll probably be different for every city and every water agency. They're all unique relationships. And then lastly, I just want to talk about direct service providers in general, like straight up direct service providers that you hire to maintain your city or build a new landscape. Michelle touched on this. These are probably going to be subcontractors to whoever you're contracting to. The person actually doing the procuring, the landscape contractor, is in the case of landscape construction going to be a sub to the general, right? And who at least. And then with landscape maintenance, even though you may have that direct contract with your landscape maintenance firm, often they sub this work out because the equipment is specialized, as you can see in that top photo, or if it's getting blown in, for example. So the point is that my point for this is just that you want to make sure you have these requirements and all the important documents, and the best way to make sure that you're going to get the compliance from that person who's basically at the end of the project is to make sure it's upfront in the RFP that whoever you're hiring has to pass down these requirements, or it could be in bid specs if it's a landscape maintenance firm, and then make sure it gets into the contract documents and that they're aware. And then the requirements you want to make sure you include are materials that are meeting 1383 requirements. For example, our model direct service provider agreement has what does count and what doesn't count. So for example, the nitrolyzed soil conditioner Peter talked about is in the this doesn't count. So that's important. And then also the documentation, you want to make sure you're getting all the backup that you need for your implementation record, and that you're getting it in a format that you can use. So for us, we created a template that our cities can use so that will help them with reporting every year from their contractors. And that's it for me. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to start our Q&A session for compost and mulch. And I just wanted to remind everyone of kind of our instructions for the Q&A session. If you are using GoToWebinar, you can type the question summary into the question pane. And the questions, again, should focus on the presentations and discussion in the webinar. Jill is going to be reading out the questions and directing it to the presenters to answer them. And if you are just watching over the broadcast, email your questions to slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov. And Jill, go ahead.
Thank you. I would just like to say that this webinar is being recorded, and once ADA compliant will be live on our website, along with the presenters' slides and links. So that's been asked a few times. All right, first questions go to Peter. Peter, there's a couple of questions regarding compost socks. So do compost socks count towards the city's procurement requirement? Where can they be purchased? And are there resources to address barriers regarding stormwater runoff and endangered species concerns?
Yeah, those are good questions. And it depends on whether it counts or not. I would say a clear example where it would count is if the jurisdiction itself has their own construction project, and Kelly and Michelle can jump in here and add anything, but so that seems like if you're building a new building, like a new city hall or police, building or whatever, then, and you have construction going on, and you tell your contractor, your general contractor who's building the project, to use these compost-based BMPs during that construction, and that seems like that definitely would count. You can use compost, you can use mulch, they would both count. The compost socks, sometimes people imagine that they're filled with like a fine compost. That's not generally the case. They're usually filled with what they call a coarse compost, which basically is wood mulch, like I showed in that picture of the composted wood mulch. It looks more like that. So that's in terms of the credit. Now, Kelly could maybe address more of the direct service provider issue of, are there other ways to get that kind of mulch or compost to count? But that one is pretty clear if it's your construction project. And then there was another question about where to get them, I think, or what. There's one company called Filtrex that makes the product. That's one place. I think there are maybe other companies out there that make a compost sock, but Filtrex is one of the big ones. That's the one that I showed in that. If it's in that green kind of netting, that is, I think, a polypropylene netting, and it is very durable and reusable. You can pick it up and you can move it and use it on another site if it's if it hasn't been there for too long, but it shouldn't be left there permanently. It's a temporary BMP. And so at the end of the project, either you can open it up and you can dump out the mulch and use the mulch like you would use other mulch, or you can move it to another site and keep using it. And I think that answers most of the questions. I think there was one about how does it work. It works as a filtration system, as opposed to straw wattles or fiber rolls that don't filter the water. The compost sock actually can filter the water as it goes through. And if you watch that little video, it'll explain more about that.
Okay, what about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
Oh, yeah, there was a question about species of concern.
Yes.
Yeah, and that can be a concern with like straw wattles, actually, or fiber rolls. Sometimes will be, they'll use a netting that is plastic around the fiber roll, and that can be a problem on sites where you have endangered species or other animals that can get caught in there. You can get a cotton sock instead, or other types of materials that will biodegrade and break down in the environment over time. So that's generally what people use on a site that has some species of concern. As I said, with the Filtrex or the compost sock, you can do the same thing. You can get it with a cotton netting, or you can get it with this. I think this particular like green sock that I showed, it doesn't, animals don't really get caught in there. So that's another option, but you do need to remove it at the end of the project.
Thank you, Peter. A couple more questions. Mulch compost must be free when being used on these projects to count towards procurement. Is that correct?
I couldn't hear the beginning of that. What?
Sorry, does the mulch compost need to be free when being used on projects to count towards a jurisdiction's procurement?
No.
No.
Well, Kelly and Michelle, why don't you take that one? You guys seem to have us. I still didn't really hear it very well. Composted mulch, does it, if it's free?
Yeah, I think Michelle answered it. So
Yeah, so the jurisdiction does not need to make the material available for free. And that's why both Kelly and I are talking about these agreements, right? So if we have an agreement with a farmer, for example, that we're establishing or something, they may incur a cost to take that material. So we do not have to give it away for free.
And you could even have an agreement with a school district, for example, that, and this is something I remember agencies are working on. Well, can we count all the compost you're going to use anyway in mulch toward our procurement target, since school districts don't have their own target? And I think Cynthia's going to talk about another strategy too that involves rebates. So yeah, there's flexibility.
Peter, you made a comment that compost is worth more credit than mulch. Can you explain that?
Yeah, maybe Kelly could actually do a better job of that than I can. I think she's done all the calculations.
Okay, here's the deal. So if you look at when you look at how many tons of compost is how many tons of organics, 0.58 tons of compost is 1 ton of recycled organic waste product. But for mulch, 1 ton of mulch is 1 ton of organics. So you need to use less. So you'll need to use less compost to meet that requirement. So, and moreover, mulch is a lot lighter. So that ton is a lot of mulch because you use it on a volume basis, right? Because you're trying to make a layer for a weed abatement kind of situation, right? So if I used 600 pounds per cubic yard as a bulk density when I was doing those calculations, it can vary, but that's just a common bulk density. So just a decent rule of thumb. But yeah, it's lighter. And because you count it ton by ton compared to a partial ton equaling a ton, that's how it counts more. Did that make sense? Okay.
Well, also because there's the aspect of when it's wood mulch that's composted is counted as compost. It's not counted as mulch. And I think that was the point I was trying to make, is that when you compost something, now you get to count it as compost. And in some situations, you're using a lot more of that composted wood mulch, using maybe 3 inches of it instead of half an inch of compost. So if you compost mulch, then you can get, I think, a lot of credit for it. But it is, like Kelly was saying, there's the weight issue as well.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm skating through these questions as they're rolling in, see if we've already answered them. Jurisdiction and suppliers are having difficulties understanding SB 1383 procurement requirements. The regulation seems to suggest that in order for mulch to be compliant, it must be composted to meet land application requirements. This requirement makes sense for compost, but not for mulch. Can someone explain this? How can jurisdictions specify mulch that is not necessarily composted to meet 1383 requirements?
Yeah, I'll say one thing, and then Kelly can go. I mean, one thing is about mulch, it's also a little bit tricky, is that you can't just chip your own trees and count that. So that's a lot of people are like, oh, we already do that. It's great. We have a chipper. We chip trees and landscaping material around our city, and we spread it out in parks. That doesn't count. You have to procure the mulch from either a transfer station, a compost facility, or I think a landfill. There's these regulated facilities. You have to get it from a regulated facility. And so you can't just buy it also from a chip and grind operation where that's all they do is chip and grind, I think, right? So Kelly can, I think, provide more details on that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, this is really a reg question, so I'd refer you to CalRecycle, but the only other thing that is different is meeting the contamination requirements for metals, pathogens, and inerts that compost does have to meet. But yeah, but you can still use like recycled pallet mulch. You can use arbor mulch that's been generated at one of those facilities. As it's, yeah, there are options.
There was something about land application they were talking about. Yeah, Michelle.
No, just to follow on that. So again, the way we're putting it into our guidelines, The distinction is not that the material has to be composted for a period of time. So the question sounded like, does the mulch have to be composted? That's not the distinction. It needs to be procured from a regulated facility that makes compost, a Title 14 facility. So the reason is because they want you to be able to purchase materials from a facility that somebody is monitoring. Right, but the material itself doesn't have to be composted for any period of time. It can still be, you know, chipped pallets or what have you. So it can be a mulch product that is produced on that. But we also, as Peter was mentioning, we have lots of operations where they're just chipping material on site. We do not want to stop them from doing that. So we're being really clear with our maintenance staff and all of our county staff, keep doing that. Don't stop, because that's what we want. We don't want you to haul that anywhere, or, you know, you don't need to take it to a Title 14 facility and then we buy it back or anything like that. Keep doing that. Do what you're doing, keep it on site, and then we'll find other material for these specific uses. Like right now, another item that's going to our board today is the fire mitigation, right? Fire prevention. And so we're looking at those kinds of uses as well. How can you use composted material to mitigate and things like that? So there's just that distinction that it doesn't have to be composted for any period of time or PFRP. It just needs to be purchased from that facility. Kelly, were you going to say something else, or you're just working, you're nodding?
I'm just yes, you guys said it all.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit more about the fire issue, I think this is a big potential use of composted wood mulch is as a fire, maybe prevention is a too strong a word, but it does appear to be less flammable than uncomposted mulch, and we need more research on this. And there was a research study done about 10 years ago, but nothing that I've found really since then, and it compared the flammability of all these different mulches, and it seemed to be saying that composted wood mulch was less flammable. And if that's the case, we could be using a lot of it, just on single family homes that are in that interface area near where fires may be happening. And so instead of using some kind of rock mulch or just bare soil, we could be using composted wood mulch. And so that would be great.
And so fire prevention and floatability. So in stormwater projects, you can also get a little more weight on the material. And so there's also been research about minimizing the floatability of your mulch when you're in a stormwater project. So there's lots of opportunities to use truly composted mulch, but you don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah, and Caltrain a lot. Sorry, Kelly, what'd you say?
Oh, I just said, but it is the best mulch. I have it in my phone.
Kelly, I've got a couple questions for you if we can move forward. Let's see. I'm sorry. What is the cost for the free compost? I'm just going to kind of summarize a couple of these questions at once. What is the cost for the free compost operation? Is the compost plastic free? And then there's quite a few people that are asking if anyone is able to share language that can be used to require landscaping projects to give jurisdictions credit for the compost mulch purchasing, or RFP language for landscaping firms. Do you have example language? Oceanside is currently working on their RFPs and would love some peer matching there.
Okay. So
yeah.
First of all, yeah, we have a model direct service provider agreement. We also have model specs. The specs are, we've kind of been doing them as necessary. So when Alameda County was going out to bid for a project, we worked with them, and in City of Alameda, same thing. We looked at their entire spec book to get in their standard specs and wrote in all the places where they would need to use compost, where they could use compost and mulch, and also about the documentation they need. I don't know if they will share that with you, but we can certainly share our model agreements and specifications. That's not a problem. For RFP language, we don't have any yet because we haven't had someone need it. So it's been such a, like, just trying to get everyone up and running, like whatever someone needs something, that's kind of what we're working on. So anyway, and then as far as the cost for the free compost, that's a great question. That is going to vary, right? So for example, the hub that we looked at, Stop Waste is currently, it's a pilot. So Stop Waste is incubating this idea and we are paying for it. And so because we are paying for it, it's like $30 a yard plus delivery, right? It's not cheap because we just have to buy it. Now, if you're a city, if we hand this off to the city where it's located, since they haven't agreed yet, I didn't want to mention their name, but we hand it off to that city, they get compost from in their franchise. And so for them, it could be part of that. And so it wouldn't exactly be free, of course, but it wouldn't be an additional cost to whatever's already in the franchise. So it's going to vary. But if you're going to buy it in one-off, like 20-yard deliveries, like we are, you're going to be paying not the per yard or the per bag price, but it's not the cheapest you could get. So, although who knows what's going to happen with pricing. Do you guys want to add anything? Yeah.
I just want to tag on that the attachment that I sent to CalRecycle today does have our contract exhibit, and that's what we are using in RFPs. It will say, or it'll be in the exemplar agreement. So we have amended contracts and already with everybody that we're working with, but we would use that exhibit. So you can check that out and see if that's useful. But that's what we're using to modify our existing contracts that we have, and we would use that for new ones as well. So see if that's useful to you, if your attorneys like it. Remember, check with your attorneys.
And there was also something about, is it plastic free? I could say something, and then Kelly, maybe, or Michelle, you can.
Oh, right.
But compost quality is another large topic that we're not really getting into today. But compost quality has been improving over the years, and the U.S. Composting Council has programs to get better quality. But plastic is still an issue, depending on the source material or the feedstocks that you're using to make that compost. And so in our specification for this composted wood mulch, we are pushing the envelope a little bit and trying to lower the threshold that's allowed for plastic in that material to down to 0.1%. And that's by weight. And so when it's by weight, film plastic is very lightweight. So 0.1 may not be as low as we, maybe we want to go lower than that, but that's right now seems like kind of something that compost producers have told us, or the mulch producers say they can meet that. Caltrans has also been, procuring a lot of compost and mulch. They're also trying to, push that to get it lower. So I think that's something that's just going to evolve over time, and it's not plastic free, but we're trying to get lower and lower on it.
All right, thank you, Peter, Michelle, and Kelly. We have to move on to Will's presentation on anaerobic digestion. If we have some time at the end, we'll come back to any questions that weren't answered.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you so much. And just as kind of a reminder too, if you have any questions specifically on meeting regulatory requirements, you're going to want to send those to CalRecycle at slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov. We brought Michelle, Kelly, and Peter, and all the other panelists in just for kind of informational purposes to share what they're doing or different ways to use compost and mulch. All right, Will, let me get to you, make you presenter. Okay, well, it's all yours. And we see your slides.
Great. So thank you, Andrew and Michelle, for inviting me to speak. Good morning, everyone. My name is Will Chen. I'm a supervising engineer at LA County Sanitation Districts, and I particularly work in the solid waste department in the energy recovery group. So we manage and run our landfill gas to energy facilities. We're in-house food waste recycling program developers, and also we buy and sell electricity for the entire agency. So today I'll be sharing some details on our food waste recycling program from the perspective of not only a co-digestion program operator, but also a future producer of 1383 procurement products. I'll briefly walk through some of our program's different components and then spend some time focusing on the procurement side of things in the later half of my presentation, followed by the Q&A session. So the district started developing our food waste recycling program back in 2014. We were kind of in a unique position where underneath the same roof, we managed both solid waste and wastewater, and recognized that there was additional digestion capacity to handle organics. So this started off with bench scale tests in flasks, which then developed into a full-scale demonstration project to what it is today with 4 new commercially sized operating facilities. Now this schematic here summarizes the different components of what goes in and out of each step. First, we're able to receive unprocessed food waste at our Point of Hills MRF, where nearly all the inorganics and contaminants are removed, leaving behind an organic wet fraction that's converted into a pumpable slurry. This slurry is then transported via tanker trucks approximately 30 miles south to our largest wastewater treatment plant in Carson, California, which we call the Joint Water Pollution Control Plant, or JWPCP. Here, the processed food waste or slurry from our MRF and from a number of external customers is received at our slurry receiving facilities, where the material is offloaded, stored, and slowly fed into the digesters. From there, we let biology take its place and convert that waste into a biogas, which is a resource that can be converted into a number of different products. So the next couple of slides will showcase some of the equipment that we have recently installed to help serve our member cities meet their diversion and procurement requirements. And these tanks that you see here are part of 2 slurry receiving facilities that we recently constructed. Tanker trucks park in front of an offloading bay where operators can connect a hose to offload their slurry. The tanks act as a buffer to help distribute the feeding or co-digestion of slurry throughout the day and can act as a way to isolate loads that might not meet our specifications. Just like our stomachs, we have to slowly feed the digesters, otherwise indigestion often occurs. Now, once material is offloaded at the slurry receiving facilities, pumps continually feed our anaerobic digesters where microorganisms convert the organic material into biogas. JWPCP has a total of 24 digesters, each with a volume capacity of about 4.5 million gallons. We're currently only directly feeding slurry into 5 of these 24 digesters, and we've determined that each digester is only able to comfortably co-digest about 80 tons per day of food waste slurry, which accounts for 10% of the total digested volume or 30% of the total digested solids. Treatment plant operation is obviously of paramount importance, so we had to conservatively ensure that nothing from this food waste program would impact the primary purpose of this facility, which is to continuously receive and treat sewage from 4.8 million residents and businesses every day. So most of the biogas is generated from the digesters. Located throughout the facility is collected and used on site at the total energy facility. This power plant shown here is able to produce up to 20 megawatts of power, meeting its own electrical demands so that no power is needed from the utility. This combined heat and power facility not only produces electricity, but also steam that is sent to the digesters to help maintain a warm mesophilic environment for these microorganisms. Now, since we started receiving more and more organics at JWPCP, more biogas was generated than what the power plant needs. So instead of flaring or burning the additional biogas that does not offer any benefit, we designed and installed a biogas conditioning system, which takes extra biogas and converts it into a renewable natural gas that meets transportation fuel specification. What this facility does is essentially separate the methane from the carbon dioxide in the biogas, removes moisture and contaminants by using activated carbon, chillers, and membranes. And what you're left with is a clean and renewable fuel that can help displace fossil natural gas. Now, the RNG that was created by the BCS, or Biogas Conditioning System, feeds an adjacent publicly accessible CNG fueling station that the district owns as well. In its current form, the station is really only able to comfortably fuel light to medium duty vehicles such as vans, buses, trash trucks, but not heavy duty tractor trailers. We're currently designing and expanding a station and hope to have that up and running by the end of next year. So now I'll shift gears and talk a little bit about how the districts fit into 1383's procurement role as well. This may be a review for some of you in the audience, but in case others are not clear on how and how much each jurisdiction will need to procure, I'll walk everyone through some of the calculations and conversions that CalRecycle has posted on their website. Now, each jurisdiction, city or county has a procurement target which is based on its population size. CalRecycle has established a per capita factor which calculates the procurement target. From there, another set of conversion factors can be used to determine the volumes or quantities of the different products that the jurisdiction has a choice to choose from to procure in order to meet their target. Now, this slide here shows the different products that any jurisdiction can procure to meet their requirements. I've shown the procurement conversions on the right, which details that 1 ton of organic waste can be converted into 5 different products: 21 diesel gallon equivalents of transportation fuel, 242 kilowatts of electricity, 22 therms for heating, or about half a ton of compost or 1 ton of mulch that was previously discussed. So to put things into perspective, the infographic shows the quantities of these products that a jurisdiction with a population size of 100,000 residents would need to procure. This gives a sense of scale for the different products when comparing and shopping. And as a reminder, the procurement target of 8,000 tons of organic waste in the middle of the graphic comes from multiplying the population size of 100,000 residents by the 0.08 per capita factor from the previous slide. So out of the different products that jurisdictions can procure, the district's food waste recycling program is currently able to produce 2: transportation fuel and electricity from renewable natural gas. The districts are currently evaluating the feasibility of a pipeline injection project, which could then provide heating from RNG to interested jurisdictions, hopefully in the near future. Our program currently is able to accept up to 600 tons per day of organic waste, which translates to the amount of waste generated by 2.3 million residents using the same 0.08 tons per capita factor. So if all 600 tons per day of organic waste is received at JWPCP and is eligible towards conversion, the RNG produced at the facility can generate up to 3.9 million DGEs of fuel, 45,000 megawatts of electricity, or 4.1 million therms for heating. So even though we're already producing transportation fuel and electricity from the RNG, our products are not yet eligible per 1383 as of yet. As a producer of procurement products, there are a number of requirements that will need to be met in order for the products to be eligible. First, the organic waste that's received at the POTW must come directly from CalRecycle registered facilities categorized as a compostable material handling operation or facility other than a shipping or grinding operation, B, a transfer or processing facility or operation, and C, a solid waste landfill. Second requirement that we would have to meet is that the POTW must be in compliance with a section under the California Code of Regs, which lay out specific standard operating procedural requirements in the transport and the receipt of organics, approval from the State Water Resources Control Board, as well as the California's Department of Food and Agriculture. Third, we must keep and provide documentation of the amount of organic waste received and the equivalent amount of products that are created on the back end. So we would have to manage and track what comes in on the front in the form of anaerobically digestible organics and what goes out in the form of procurement products to ensure that we do not oversupply. And lastly, the POTW cannot landfill more than 25% of the biosolids produced at the facility. Currently, the districts are working to meet this requirement, but with a facility this large, it's quite a large undertaking, since we do produce about 1,200 tons per day of biosolids. However, we're currently doubling the capacity of our own compost facility and hope to meet this requirement before the end of next year. So what's next for us? Right now, the highest priority from the producer standpoint is to satisfy all of the aforementioned requirements. Once we do, we plan to release a request for offers or proposals for our available and eligible products, namely electricity and transportation fuel. This will help us determine which jurisdictions and or haulers are interested in our portfolio and in what quantities so that we can better plan and apportion for the final step, which is to execute direct service provider agreements. These agreements will be the mechanism in which the districts will provide the products to the jurisdictions, who would then include these quantities in their annual report to CalRecycle. And that's all I had.
Thank you, Will. All right, so we'll move on. We might come back to the compost and mulch questions, but we have a question and answer period for Will again. And just to kind of show you how to respond to those or to ask those questions. The rules back up.
Not seeing any questions for Will. Oh, here's one. Will LACSD set up an agreement with Clean Energy to credit other cities for procurement requirements?
Sorry,
Will,
Will.
you're muted. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, there I am. Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Sure. Will LACSD set up an agreement with Clean Energy to credit other cities for procurement requirements?
Well, Clean Energy is who we hire to operate and maintain the station. So the station is fully owned by the districts, and the renewable attributes and all the credits associated with that are owned by the district. So if a jurisdiction is interested in fueling at that publicly accessible station, they're free to do so. We would just have to track the point of receipt, the volumes that are dispensed through Clean Energy station, Clean Energy's equipment, but then we would then provide documentation that that fuel came from diverted organics that was converted, from diverted organics to count towards eligibility and procurement.
Thank you. We have another one here. For cities that have their own CCA or utility, how can they obtain a PPA with entities generating energy from organics?
So this might be getting into some of the details, which I'll kind of relate to or direct to CalRecycle. But from my understanding, the power that we currently generate from the biogas and use on site is already eligible for procurement. Well, once we satisfy all the requirements. So we would be kind of the gatekeepers of that quantity. And the electrons don't technically have to go into the grid for jurisdictions to uptake. But we can simply direct certain quantities of power that's already generated and used by our facility to interested jurisdictions. So instead of a PPA or power purchase agreement, you're not technically buying the power or the electrons associated with that. You would just be simply buying the procurement quantities that came from the diversion of organics that went to be converted into power or renewable electricity.
Sorry. Will the county have spare electricity from biomass be available for jurisdictions to procure through direct access?
I'm not really sure. The power that's used on site, it's kind of separate, right? We generate the power, we use it ourselves, we self-supply. But then that's completely separate from the procurement side of things. So again, that's tied to how much organics the JWPCP facility receives that counts towards diversion. And then we would then convert that quantity of organics received, co-digest it, and then convert that into a quantity of power that's produced to then start distributing or supplying to jurisdictions. So that would be separate from any power that we sell through our direct access or through PPA or to the utility or use on site.
All right, a couple more on credits. Who is getting credit for this energy, individual cities or the county in general? And how are the credits allotted for member cities, proportional to their population?
So one of the steps that we would have to do is first we have to make sure that our products are eligible, but one of the steps is to really gauge the market and release an RFP or RFO to see which jurisdictions are interested, because again, this heavily depends on how much organics we receive, which by the way is highly variable. Sometimes we'll have a lot of organics come in, and again, right now we're not seeing that much residential. It's primarily businesses and restaurants where we receive organics from. So that can go up or down. And so again, unless a city would exclusively say, we're going to be bringing out all of our diverted organics to JWPCP, and then you would want that representative fair share of procurement products on the back end, that's something that we can work out. But it does depend on the jurisdiction's haulers as well, depending on where they take their trash to. So we would be releasing some sort of request for offers or proposals, like I mentioned earlier, to see what interest there is. Because again, there may be a lot of interest, there might be not a lot of interest, and we would really only have enough product on the back end to supply or distribute, depending on how much organics we receive on the front end.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Sorry, Jill. Are there any more questions, Jill?
Nope, that was it for now.
Okay. It doesn't mean you can't ask more questions, but since there's none actively popping up, we're going to move on to our next grouping of panelists, which would be, wrong way. We're going to move on to Zensi Tan to talk about what they're doing in Sonoma County. So let me unmute you, Zensi, and then you can tell everyone what you're doing. Oh, you're self-muted, Zensi.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right, here I am. So I didn't prepare a presentation, but I was just going to talk about what we've been doing here in Zero Waste Sonoma and for Sonoma County. So just a little bit of an introduction. Zero Waste Sonoma is a JPA in Sonoma County, which is north of San Francisco by about an hour. We have 10 jurisdictions in our JPA, or representing, our JPA represents 10 jurisdictions. This includes unincorporated county and 9 other cities and a town. So we are similar in certain respects to some of the presenters that have come before about how we have a really mature compost market. We're a primarily agricultural community, and so we run out of compost every year, and there's really no problem about getting rid of compost like in other parts of the state. We decided that since there was a issue that a lot of the jurisdictions were concerned about potentially running into competition with the agricultural community if our jurisdictions were just to outright buy compost, we decided to go about this in a different way. So using direct service providers, we decided to create a compost rebate. And can I share my screen here, or should I just share the link?
Why don't you just share the link for now, and if we have time, we can go back to maybe sharing the screen.
Okay, sounds good. So we have a web page. Okay, I'm not sure if this will go out to everybody, but we have a web page that explains our compost rebate program, and essentially what it is, we are providing a 10% rebate to anybody who purchases between 30 cubic yards and 1,000 cubic yards of compost. This rebate is, how should I describe this? There's an agreement that people have to sign. So that's the direct service provider part. They have to establish themselves as a direct service provider with us before they make the purchase. That's very important. And then we are only providing this rebate for compost at this time. Since this is the first year, we're not really sure how it will go. But in the future, we may expand the rebate to cover mulch and other products as well. But this year, it's just compost. It doesn't cover the cost of spreading the compost or transporting the compost. It's just for the cost of the material itself. So once people sign the agreement, they can purchase compost from, at this time, it's 4 facilities that I've listed on the website, but we are potentially adding 2 more. These are permitted compost facilities in the region. And the reason we decided to have a approved facility list is because we know those facilities are permitted, and it would just be a lot easier than having people buy compost and then come to us and ask if the compost was eligible for a rebate. The other thing too is that these facilities are the most local to Sonoma County. We don't want people buying compost from very far away and claiming the rebate, because that means that it's not really, if they're transporting it, obviously there's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, but also we wanted the compost to be applied in Sonoma County, again, so that the benefit of carbon sequestration and water retention would be local. So once they do that, once they've purchased the compost, they can come back to this website, and at the bottom of the page, there's a claim form that asks them for certain information about, what their mailing address is, and to upload their receipts, and also a W-9. And then once we have all that information, we can process the rebate and send them the check So that's kind of quick, but that's essentially the program that we've created. And it is, I would say, relatively new. We only just started this program, promoting it this spring. And I've asked the Farm Bureau and the resource conservation districts to help promote this program. And we have had quite a lot of interest. So that's really good. But yeah, so I don't really have much else to share other than that. Are there any questions?
No, that's perfect, Zinzi. So we're going to do all of the peer sharing group together, and then we'll ask questions at the end. So Kathleen Gallagher with City of Colma, make sure you're not muted on my end, and then you can share what you're doing.
Great, sounds good.
Oh, perfect, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So I'm Kathleen Gallagher. So hats off to CalRecycle's, just sitting through this, just a great cross section of ways for us to meet the requirements of 1383. There's just so much happening. So I've been a sustainability manager with CSG for about 20 years. We have a lot of construction going on here, so I hope y'all can't hear that. One of my roles is sustainability manager for Colma in San Mateo County. And I not only implement SB 1383 requirements, I also manage their climate action plan development and energy efficiency and water conservation programs. So this was a great tie-in because there's a great interrelationship of managing sustainability programs with meeting the city's 1383 requirements. And basically the new program that I developed provided compost to some of the largest property owners in the city. And they're memorial parks. They are commercial businesses and they are memorial parks. Unique to certainly Colma, but I believe that there's some great cross sections and information to share for really all jurisdictions in California. So the quick highlights of the program are in early 2022, I reached out to about 7 to 8 of these large property owners to tell them about this new program, where we would provide quality compost to them at no cost and really discussed how the program is going to help them reduce water usage upon application, reduce needs for pesticides, improve their soil health. And all of this, obviously, is going to help them reduce operating costs. My intent, and really the key there, was to understand their perspective as opposed to where we all sit, is how are we going to get rid of all this compost on an annual basis. I really wanted to take the perspective of these large property owners and how this would benefit them. So number one, that they would accept the material, accept the program, not only in 2022, but for years to come. So through my work in implementing previous water conservation programs within the jurisdiction, I had the benefit of knowing some of these property owners through some workshops that I provided. And it really did help build credibility for this new idea that we were presenting to the businesses. A key takeaway where feasible for our jurisdictions is to try and get to know our community stakeholders and businesses. I think it really helps build the credibility as we try and really expand 1383 requirements throughout our jurisdiction. I also researched the compost quality certifications. I think Peter talked a bit about that in terms of the quality of the materials. And why I wanted to do that was certainly so I could talk with assuredness to our property owners that they were going to be receiving this high quality compost that has gone through 3 or 4 different certifications. I also worked with our hauler, who is actually the provider of the compost, to discuss my intent on this program to deliver compost to the property owners. And they were excellent and great partners to us in their ability to not only be an early adopter of this type of concept, but they were a great partner to us. I was very intent to ensure that the very first program was very successful. because my intent was I was on the scene meeting with the property owner. We took a lot of pictures and we ended up taking this program. I was working with the city manager to ensure that our city council knew what was going on, and we loaded this on our website so that other property owners knew the availability of the material. I did want to do a shout out to Republic Services and to Monica DiVincenzi, who was my partner in crime, the municipal manager at Republic. They really helped us be successful in terms of making this first and subsequent deliveries of compost to our property owners successful. I'm probably running out of time, but some of the key takeaways is for the very first delivery, like I said, happened in mid-February. I had met with the property manager. Our city manager really wanted to let folks know of the availability. So again, that this will be a successful program, not only in this year, but for years to come. There's an excellent intersection between sustainability and SB1383, certainly because of carbon sequestration, water conservation, all huge problems for so many of us in California. So it was a great intersection. It really does close the circle. So for all the challenges that 1383 is, I think the fact that it closes the loop and assists us in building infrastructure is excellent and a great part of the legislation. In terms of cost, so I had requested cost details in terms of delivery for 20 cubic yards, 30 cubic yards, so I could get this information to our property owners and to determine the total costs to the jurisdiction, not only obviously for this year, for subsequent years. As was mentioned earlier, our franchise agreement does allow a percentage of compost to be free, but it's only a very small percentage. It's only about 8% of the total procurement requirement that we have. So the additional compost is actually at a cost for not only the delivery, but also for the compost. And those numbers, we have also a unique situation there because we actually are receiving a credit due to non-implementation of another program. This is sort of unique to our jurisdiction. I don't think that there's going to be a lot of replication through other programs, but the bottom line is we're able to achieve these meeting the procurement requirement through the compost that's provided at no additional cost, through the 1383 grant from CalRecycle, and then through this credit that we're getting for non-implementation of our programs. I think some of the key obstacles were when I first started talking about this program to some of my colleagues in various cities, they were basically saying, I don't think they're going to need it. I don't think this is going to be something that's beneficial. But it was only when I started to actually talk to these property owners and have real conversations, meet them either out on the site or Zoom, that yes, there was indeed a need, and they were purchasing it. So this was certainly key for the success of the program. I think this is very much a moving target. I think what's working in 2022 will be changing in subsequent years through partnerships that we have with the Resource Conservation District and other ways to meet our procurement requirement. But for 2022, we're about 85% have met our requirement so far. So far, so good. And I'm happy to answer questions at the end of the session.
Thank you, Kathleen. We appreciate that. Michelle White, City of Roseville. Sorry, Michelle, we had you muted on our end. You should be able to talk now.
Don't do that to me. No, I'm bringing up the caboose here at the end. So thank you, Andrew, for having us, the City of Roseville. And I'm Michelle White, the Compliance Administrator. It's actually my 1-year anniversary with the city today, so I am new to the city. So this project that we had an anaerobic digestion project, and the city began planning that shortly after 1383 was signed back in 2016. And of course, like any good government project. It took a while to get through planning, and then it was off to construction in 2020. So there were quite a few challenges with COVID and the supply chain issues and inflation that led to a 10-month delay in the project. But we will be operational by January 2023. And with that, we will be producing enough RNG to fuel our fleet. So one of the things that's unique about Roseville is we do have our collections internal, so we don't franchise out that work. The collection staff is city staff. And like Will Chen was saying, it was a good opportunity because we do have the utility of the solid waste utility and the wastewater treatment plant utility to take advantage and leverage that, being under the same umbrella of Roseville. So we do plan to meet about 80% of our procurement target with the producing about 200,000 DGE per year. And with that, the one thing that is concerning that we're following is the CARB, the California Air Resources Board, and their requirements to transition fleets to electric vehicles, starting a transition in 2025 through the 2027 time period. So that could make projects like this potentially not the same economic viability. Right now, we're looking at a 20-year return on investment. It was about an $8 million project, and there was about $700,000 in grants obtained for that. So like I said, we're only meeting about 80% of the procurement requirement through the anaerobic digestion, and the other components was kind of similar to what Michelle had mentioned from Santa Clara County, where we had convened a citywide group with representatives from each department to identify all the internal sources of where we could use compost and mulch. So we've got those pieces in the works as well. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Michelle. We'd like to open it up now to questions for Zinzi, Kathleen, and Michelle. Jill?
Great. We have a question for Kathleen. Yes, for Kathleen. How will the memorial parks in Coloma be applying the compost? Jurisdictions have found that navigating the monuments makes efficient application a challenge. Would love to hear from your experience.
Sure, that's a great question. So just to be clear, this is Coloma in San Mateo County, not Coloma in the gold country. So just to be clear, because there was an interesting situation where folks thought we were Coloma. We are Coloma. That's a great question. And in talking to the facilities and property manager, they actually have equipment. Once this material was delivered, they had equipment and their staff was ready to take the material. It's probably a 75-acre facility. So their intent was to basically do this in phases. They had delivered the material where over a series of days and weeks, they were actually going to be distributing the material.
Great, thank you. For Cincy, how much money was appropriated for rebates?
So we have budgeted about $150,000 for this year. And the rebate, again, is 10%. And I should mention, I forgot to mention this before, it's 10%, but the rebate, even though we're paying for only 10% of the compost, we're getting 100% of the credit for the purchase.
Okay, and a question back to Kathleen. What kind of equipment are they using in Coloma?
Sorry, that's my fault. There you go, Kathleen.
No problem at all. Yeah, they have a wide range of equipment there. In this particular, which was our very first delivery, it's basically a small version of a backhoe. So it's got a couple of different pieces of equipment, and they are utilizing that.
All right, thank you, Kathleen. I think that is all the questions for this group of panelists.
All right, we have about 24 minutes left. So Jill, you want to take us back? I think most of our questions are kind of for Peter, Michelle, and Kelly. Kind of pick up where we left off there.
Yeah, if we could, let's see, Michelle Young, a couple of questions for you. Could you talk more about bringing together your interdepartmental working group? How you actually got people to come together, attend meetings, at what level were the participants?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as I mentioned earlier, it remains an ongoing process. But what we did is we really got the buy-in at the department director level. And while the department directors do not attend all the meetings, they're, excuse me, they're in the loop. So about 2 years ago, a little more than that now, we started to have meetings about these requirements and to say that you know, we needed other players. So that direction has come from the sort of deputy executive director for the whole county, that level of invitation for staff to attend. It's mostly management level folks. But as I said in the challenges section, where the conversation sometimes ends up is, okay, there's a task such as we need to track all of the purchases of compost and mulch for all countywide operations. So who is funded properly and staffed properly to do that? So that remains, that's the hot potato portion that I said. So we're all meeting together and we've been strategizing to develop the policy and the guidelines. But where the ongoing conversation is where should this live permanently? So as I mentioned, we have 2 budget requests in, one for a staff position in our Office of Sustainability, and one in, well, we have one in agriculture that would be for edible food, but also somebody in procurement. So it's a new kind of space for somebody to have oversight. I would love to jump in and take all these things on, but then I'd be charging the wrong kind of rate payers. So that's kind of where the challenge has been, but the conversation continues. So we're continuing to do work and develop our training modules and look at contracts and things like that. But I think the ongoing question that jurisdictions around, certainly in our county and probably around the state, is where should this land permanently? And I would say that reporting is one of the big places, record keeping and reporting is one of the big umbrella areas that we are still looking to confirm who is going to be in the role to do that. So there's some arm wrestling going on between sustainability and procurement. No, I'm kidding. They're working really well together, but it's really looking for where we have the staff bandwidth and the proper funding. So hopefully that's helpful.
Michelle, there's another question, and you probably touched on it just now a little bit, but what about like funding between, oh, I cannot find the question, I apologize, between rates and general funds?
Right, and I had mentioned that in this case, for procurement, the conversation that we're having is, why would we assume that our unincorporated ratepayers would pay to implement a countywide requirement? So the funding proposal that is in is for general fund to cover the compost procurement, just the way the general fund or whichever fund is buying paper, right? So we wouldn't ask our ratepayers to buy paper for other departments. So it's a similar kind of thing. But then obviously there are parts of 1383. So our monitoring and compliance for the routes, that's clearly going to come from the garbage ratepayers. But I think one of the distinctions and one of the places where people can be creative is if you get a chance, and I would recommend it because steal any language you have, if you get a chance to look at our board report for the Ag Resiliency Incentive Program, we're really reiterating to the board that the benefit of climate smart agriculture is not just 1383. That's actually probably a tier 3 benefit, right? So we're reminding them they already have an interest in supporting local farms. They already have, commitments on climate action. So we really put that program as an example into that context to say, it doesn't need new funding. It already had funding from the general fund. We're just adding this benefit. It's almost like a Ginsu knife, right? You're going to get the procurement to support the ag plan and the climate action plan, but then you also get this with very small additional amounts of money. You also get to take credit for the compost that's used in those projects. So I encourage people to really think about how you can broaden that base of justification to the other benefits that people will get. And again, this is talking about agriculture, but you could still have that for county operations, MWELO, really find the broadest base of benefit in order to justify who should be paying for that.
Great, thank you. Kelly, would love to get more information about how school districts can help cities and counties.
I love that.
Yeah, if you want to, actually, I could just provide your email to this person, unless you have something you want to add in real quick.
Well, best of luck. I mean, nobody wants to do this, and no one wants to act as a direct service provider out of the goodness of their heart. So you need to offer the school district something, whether, and it might be the material, it might be something else. It might be you're helping them.
All those who can become pregnant like myself. So I really encourage you on behalf of all of our students.
So I don't have any, we don't have any agreements in place yet. The conversations are just starting to happen. They're pretty thorny so far.
All right. Peter, is composted mulch or a mulch compost combo a current product or practice? And if so, where?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Composted mulch or a mulch compost combo a current product or practice? And if so, where have you seen it?
Yeah, I mean, it is, the terminology, I admit, is a little difficult for people. Like Caltrans has a fine compost, a medium compost, and a coarse compost. We're talking about a composted wood mulch, and people are like, wait, composted wood, what are you talking about? And it is a little, I admit, it's a little bit difficult. What we're seeing is that there's a few different ways to make, regarding this specification that we put together for this composted wood mulch, or what we're calling biotreatment wood mulch. There's a few different ways to make it. You can take what they call the overs from the composting process. So they're screening out the compost after it's gone through this composting process. They're screening out the large pieces. And so they end up with what we generally think of as compost, which looks more like soil. And so then you get these large pieces that they don't always know what to do with. It's usually large pieces of wood. It could be trash and other stuff that they don't want. So they try to clean that up, and then they'll put that maybe back into the compost process again. Or you can take those large pieces of wood and you could turn them into this mulch after you've taken out the trash as best as you can. And so you might add a little bit of fine compost back to that. You could take those large pieces of wood, the overs, and you could grind them a little bit so that they, there's a more particle size distribution on it. You might just take what we call arbor mulch, which is chipped tree trimmings or shredded tree trimmings, and just put that through the compost process without doing anything to it, not screening it. And when it comes out, it'll still have a wide variety of particle sizes. And so that might be the easiest way to do it, but you need to start with clean, green waste, as some people call it, which is material from landscapers. So if a landscape company goes out and does a bunch of work, they bring that material in and it's pretty clean. It doesn't have usually much trash in it or other contamination. So there's a few different ways to make the product. Some people, what makes it a little more confusing is that there's compost can be used as a mulch. So like just regular kind of compost that looks more like soil. And I don't think that's as good for many applications in the urban area because it floats away really easily, it erodes easily, it can blow around easily. So I think it's better to have some wood mulch on top of compost. Something like that I think is a better, or you incorporate the compost into the soil. So there's different ways to use it, but that's been my experience with compost being used as a mulch. It just doesn't work quite as well as the more like wood mulch. So, and I know that Kelly wanted to say something about film plastic earlier in the web, and I wanted to give her a chance to talk about that.
Yeah, I can. It's actually related because, you know, the way they get the plastic out is screening, right? And blowing and air knives, that kind of thing, right? So in the bigger, it's really hard to find a coarse compost or a composted mulch or whatever we want to call it that doesn't have plastic in it if it's come from a place that has, that accepts food waste. Like a lot of programs actually allow PE liners in commercial, and there's just no way you're going to be able to get all that plastic out and have a marketable, a clean enough overs product that you're gonna be able to screen and then make available. So like Peter said, yeah, a green waste, potentially, I don't know, I haven't looked into the biosolids compost overs, but they typically don't have as many inerts. So I don't know, there might be some sources, but, and a lot of times when I've talked to some composters who, like I have to ask specifically, I'm like, you have very clean compost, can I buy this from you? So there's a little bit of that too. But.
Here, another one for you. Does uncomposted wood mulch have to meet standards for contamination, pathogens, and metals?
Kelly?
It does. Yeah, that's a regs question, but yes, it does. And you have to adopt a policy that says I'm sorry, this is CalRecycle's job, but any mulch that you use does meet those standards for it to count toward your 1383 requirements. So you want to make sure that you're putting that not only in some kind of enforceable mechanism, but also it's making its way into your specifications and that you're asking for documentation on the back end that mulch has been tested to meet those standards. Anybody want to add anything to that?
No, I think it reiterates what we were talking about earlier, that there's two different products, but yeah, it does not have to be composted, but it needs to come from a permitted facility.
Can clean recycled lumber mulch, colored or natural, be used for 1383 procurement? Also, does the clean recycled lumber mulch have to go through this lab testing for contamination, pathogen, metals, or just composted mulch?
Yep.
I don't know how else you would show that it met your policy, right? Like you'd have to have that test data sheet, which is not super common yet for people to do.
I'm not sure who this one would be directed to, but if a city doesn't process its own rebates for turf removal, but does have a good relationship with the water utility, how would you advise on using lawn conservations to meet the city's mulch procurement requirements?
I can talk about that. So we work with the water agencies in Alameda County as well as our cities and have convened them together to sort of talk about this idea a little bit. We don't have an exact framework yet, but there's a couple mechanisms that we've already talked about. One might be supplementing the rebate. So maybe a water agency has a rebate and a city in their service area wants to supplement that rebate, and then all the lawn conversions that take place in that area would, and the rebate would be for compost and or mulch that would be 1383 eligible, right? And then so then the water agency would have to provide the reporting and record keeping service to that jurisdiction. So that's one idea. Another idea is, for example, East Bay Mud in Alameda County is already, they have a super rebate, and that rebate requires sheet mulching along with other things. And it's available throughout their service area. And they may not need the supplement, but potentially we could this is not happening yet. We have just started talking to them about this, but that might be a situation where there could be some sort of give and take, or for them to just provide that record keeping for each each city in its and county or every jurisdiction in its service area, and then you would just track it by zip code to the extent that works. Do you guys want to add anything else?
Yeah, I wanted to add something to that too, which is I talked to East Bay Mud about this idea 12, 15 years ago and didn't get a great response. But I think that they're coming around. It sounds like they're starting to see the benefits of, and the scheme that I had thought of was like, well, there's these different options and you could get more points. Like the more there's some basic requirements, kind of like LEED or any of these scorecards for green buildings or other things. You have some things that are just required, because what we did see I think in the last big drought 5-6 years ago was that some people would just remove their grass and put in gravel, which is not a great alternative. And so if you want to be eligible for some kind of rebate program or money from a water district, you could have some kind of required practices, and then you have things that get you extra points and maybe extra money. And so sheet mulching would maybe get you extra money, and then turning it into like a rain garden might get you even more money. Because that in my mind is the best, would be to do sheet mulching that's combined with some kind of a rain garden, so that you could treat your runoff from your roof as well as doing the sheet mulching, and incorporating compost and mulch. And maybe using native plants, or so there could be a bunch of different practices, high efficiency irrigation, maybe even using water from your washing machine, clothes washer. So there could be a bunch of different things that you get points for, and some programs are doing rebates now for rain barrels or for green infrastructure, putting in a rain garden. So we're starting to see a bunch of different practices out there. But that was an idea that I had about this kind of getting additional points for additional money.
Michelle, I have 2 questions for you. If you can expand on the type of agreements the county currently utilizes that include compost and mulch, and then also at what unit cost did you assume in calculating the cost to apply mulch and compost?
Okay, so for county operations, we have the largest one we have is with Brightview, and so that is sort of like a master agreement. Where departments that are doing renovation or building, they could buy materials. Most of the material that we're seeing for county operations are coming through larger contracts. So for example, I was mentioning that we're looking at capital projects. Like, how do you tease into the layers that build in a very large capital project to get to the section of that work that would be the landscape after the fact. So the attorneys, that's the one they're working on right now. And then we also have, not very frequently, but there are small purchases, but most of them are happening through either through this Brightview agreement, which is what we determine where most people are buying material. If they just need material, right, separate from a project, most of it is incorporated into building projects. So that's what the attorneys have been looking at in terms of county operations. Now, the other agreements that I mentioned are the agreements we have with the grantees. So those are going to be agreements as well for them to get granted money and utilize the material and provide the reporting and all of that. So those contracts are also happening. We don't have them completed for public review, but they are in the process. So when we do have that, if you're interested, you can let me know and I can make those available. But the exhibit that I provided as an attachment, that's what we're going to use on any agreements that would have these materials. So we built in a trigger process for procurement that when a contract comes up where this material would be could be utilized, then we will be triggered to look at it and assess it. So as an example, they pinged me the other day and they said, we have this parks contract that's coming up and it's for playground material. Well, we looked at it and we said, no, this can't be, we can't use recycled content material for this. So that's going to be one, go ahead your merry way. You're not going to use our requirement exhibit. So there is that piece that's built in as they are doing new procurements. So we want to look at the material and say, is it, would it qualify for 1383? And if so, then we would put in the exhibit. We'd modify it if needed, but the exhibit that you have as an attachment after this event would be our sort of standard template. And then I'm sorry, did you have something else? Maybe I lost track of the other piece.
Well, I think the issue of cost is a really
cost. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So again, it depends on which project you're talking about, but again, whether it's a county project where the cost includes staff and application and things like that. And so, but in the ag project, they're estimating about $40 a ton. And so that is what's called a reverse bid. So the applicants are going to make a proposal to the county that they want to have awarded. So they are, it almost will work like a rebate because they're not asking for the full price of the project, right? They're going to try and be competitive in the climate impact that they get from the activity that they choose. So they might only be asking for a portion of that to be paid, and they're paying the balance. So it's kind of, because it's a competitive grant process, they're going to try and show their cost per ton of carbon to be very efficient. So they're not necessarily giving us the full cost. And after we have these 12 contracts implemented and we start to get the data, I think we're going to have better information about how the different farmers are using this and have better data on what the true costs are per ton. But it is nice to have a program like that because, again, we might be paying half of their compost costs, but like the other Michelle, I think, said, you know, then we get all the credit. So it just depends on each proposal could be different, but they're estimating $40.
I think that's an interesting.
Peter, you had something more to say.
Yeah, I was just saying, we are kind of dating ourselves with these metaphors, like you said, the Ginsu knife earlier. I'm not sure everybody knows what that is. I was thinking about
YouTube. It's got to be there.
I was thinking about name that tune, where like I can name that tune in 3, notes, and someone else is like, I can do it in 2. That's kind of what it sounds like what they're doing. Like I can spread that compost for $20. I can do it for 10. So the lowest bidder will get your rebate. And I know, Kelly, I wanted to give you a prompt here. You guys did a great fact sheet. I don't know if you mentioned that in your presentation or if you wanted to mention
Michelle, Kelly, and Peter, thank you so much for your answers. We have one more question for Will that I want to make sure that we answer since we're running out of time. And that is, and so Will, just for clarification, LACSD is looking into the possibility of allowing jurisdictions to either procure energy produced by the sanitation district or count towards our procurement goals, or provide some of our organic waste to the LACSD facility if our hauler allows it?
Correct to both.
Quick and short. All right, well, I just want to again thank all our panelists. I know we didn't quite get through all the questions. As soon as we're able to make this presentation and the slide decks ADA compliant, we will have it posted, and all of those slide presentations, I believe, have our presenters' contact information on them, so you can reach out to them, kind of putting them on the spot here. If you have additional questions, or on the screen, you can also reach out to slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov, especially for your regulatory requirement questions. We do have a listserv to sign up for when we notify people of webinars such as this and other announcements. And then you can also visit our website for SB1383 procurement, which is on the page. And again, I just want to thank everyone for participating and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
great. Bye.